Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, I'm not going to do any more. Thank you very much. Glad to be with all of you. Jill contacted me about 48 to 72 hours ago. I told her I'd try to put together something and woke up about 11 after having been asleep for 2 hours and decided I needed to spend some time. So I've got something. What I want to do is give you a bunch of background observations on issues related to the Wiener kinds of bills. I am not involved much in the fight of that, but I think there's some things you need to be aware of. You may or may not like them, or they may not appear that useful to you, but I hope they will. I really want to break it into 3 parts. One, I want to tell you about the history of transit in LA, my experience and where you are now. 2, I want to spend some time on demographics using, and by the way, I'll describe our Demographia World Urban Areas, which is for 16 years provided comprehensive data on the largest world urban areas. And then lastly, on the Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey, which is in its 16th publication. Now, if you, I don't know if we can show, if you can see my thing there, I was born right about there. I think that's Queen of Angels, what used to be called Queen of Angels. I wasn't born there. I was born in a house at approximately Temple and Alvarado. Anyway, my family came to California, to LA in 1900, and my great-grandfather was city clerk of South Pasadena. So I'm an old Angelino, though only spent a quarter of my, well, a little more, maybe a third of my life in Los Angeles. That was the Paris University. I want to give you where I am coming from, and Jill got a little bit of it there in the introduction. I am much into domestic public policy. I am very much concerned that we facilitate improved affluence and reduce poverty. A lot of people who are critical of me think of me as being an advocate of the car. Not at all. I am an advocate of prosperity, and I am an opponent of poverty, and whatever serves those kinds of things, I'm for. Now, in 1980, while on the LA County Transportation Commission, I was serving as one of 11 members, the only one not an elected official. We had a meeting in 1980. Kenny Hahn, Supervisor Kenny Hahn, called a meeting to give us the opportunity to try to put Proposition A on the ballot, which would add 5 cents to the 5/10 of half a cent to the sales tax for transit. Nobody wanted to do it before Kenny wanted to do it, and the votes looked close. Kenny wanted a 50-cent 5-year fare guarantee. We were about to go to an 85-cent fare, and LA, whether or not you realize it, has a very high poverty, comparatively speaking, transit ridership. And Baxter Ward, whose name you may recall, who is on the Board of Supervisors, sat next to me at the meeting. Kenny wasn't sure he had Baxter's vote, but Baxter tried to introduce a motion to put 50% of the money into a rail fund. Kenny wouldn't have it. So I leaned over to Baxter and I said, how about we try 35 for rapid transit? Because I don't care if it's busway or rail, whatever gets you there, I'm interested in. And Baxter wouldn't go for that, but said, if you'll do rail, we'll do it. So we put in the amendment. It was passed. 35% of the Prop A money went to rail, and that's why the Blue Line was built. It funded a good part of the Purple Line, and so on. So that's sort of my background. And the old LA County Transportation Commission merged with SCRTD, the old transit operator in LA, in 1993. Before that merger, and that happened after my time, we had approximately the same responsibilities as MTC has had over all those issues in the Bay Area. And I realize we're not just talking about LA, so I'm going to try to make this a little more statewide. I did, as a matter of fact, spend a day a week working in downtown San Francisco for about 2 years as an employee of the now defunct Crocker Bank, part of now Wells Fargo. Here's what's happened in LA. In 1980, we were carrying almost 400 million annual passengers. By 85, at the end of a 3-year 50-cent fare, which was really successful in terms of ridership, you see we almost made 500 million annual passengers. Now we have spent, you have spent, I haven't, $25 billion almost, opening up 6 urban rail corridors, 5 commuter rail lines, not counting the one that doesn't get into LA County, 2 busways, $25 billion. What did you get for it? Well, you got a 25% reduction in transit ridership. This is a chart by Tom Rubin. Tom was the controller at SCRTD at the time of the merger. It's got an interrupted axis. You see, it only goes down to 275 million riders. You see what's happened. The purple is bus riders. Now, who rides the bus? Low-income people ride the bus, principally. Who rides the rail? Well, the rail ridership is much more affluent than the bus ridership. Look what's happened to the bus ridership. It has been absolutely decimated. It's unbelievable that anybody in Los Angeles should be thinking of this thing as a success. Now, if I were one of those people that think a city has got to have a rail system and shiny trains to be a world-class city, I'd be in bed with them, I suppose. But my view is we need to move people to jobs, all that kind of thing. Transit's in real trouble at this point in the United States, not even, even before the COVID virus. There are 6 legacy cities, which I'll talk to you about. The 6 places where transit ridership is most important, and that's not LA. And you can see what's happened to the ridership in those cities, which I will describe to you later, and the rest of the country. It is basically down. Who knows what will happen, and we don't really have much time to talk about it today. Now, the reason that transit does so poorly in competition with the cars is because it can't get you from where you are to where you want to go. If you happen to work in downtown San Francisco, just about anywhere in the Bay Area, you can get to downtown San Francisco. But try to get, for example, from Novato to Walnut Park, or Walnut Creek, or to Concord for a job. Well, you can do it, but it's going to take a lot of time. And the other problem is service doesn't go everywhere. There's the last mile problem. You end up having to walk a lot and so on. So the fact is, door-to-door transit tends to be about twice as long for virtually any trip in any metropolitan area in the United States at this point. Now, I was talking to you about the legacy cities. There are 6 of them: New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Boston, and Washington. I'm talking about the cities here, not the metropolitan areas. 58% of transit work trip destinations are in these 6 municipalities. They are the 6 municipalities with the 6 largest central business districts or downtowns. Transit is about downtown. Does a great job of getting people downtown. Can't do much of anything anywhere else, I'm sorry to say. Here we can see, for example, that those 6 legacy cities have almost 60% of the transit work trip destinations. Their share of employment is only 6%. Now, and unfortunately, I'm trying to time this thing and I can't figure out how to keep my phone on the timer. I love these phones. Anyway, I've got a slide up here of the Seattle area, which in a lot of ways is like San Francisco. It's not one of the 6 legacy cities, but it's close. You notice how 48% of the workers that work downtown get to work on transit. Outside downtown in the city of Seattle, it's like 9%. That's sort of almost the same kind of numbers, same kind of ratio you would see in the city of San Francisco. And you can see in the rest of the metropolitan area, transit is fairly irrelevant, and there are no suburban centers in the United States, regardless of how big they are, that have large transit market shares. In fact, what's not real, and that's pretty important because you think about how much of our employment is downtown. Well, overall, nationally, according to work by Peter Gordon and Bonso Lee, 7% of employment in 2000, I realize this is old data, 7% of employment in the major metropolitan areas was downtown. 15% in the largest was in what we would call edge cities, places like, Century City, Long Beach, Costa Mesa, that kind of thing. 75% and more are in dispersed areas. They cannot be served by transit, period. And by the way, the New York City metropolitan area is one of the more than 75% ones. Now, I got to tell you, I don't have time for those. Now, a very important key to mobility, to affluence, and to poverty reduction is getting to work. And there's all sorts of employment out there that suggests if you can get to work, the more jobs you can reach by any means of transport in a specific period of time, the better the economy of a city is going to perform. And generally, the standard is 30 minutes. Around the United States, virtually every metropolitan area has a 30-minute travel time or less, except for ones that have large transit shares like San Francisco and New York. And by the way, LA, which is still under 30, it has the shortest work trip travel times of any mega city in the world, despite its terrible sprawl. And I say that facetiously. Now, second, with that in mind, getting to work is really important. That's what makes our economy work. Well, by car, you can see in Los Angeles, you can get to about 24% of the jobs in 30 minutes. Transit, 0.7%. You can see those same kinds of numbers. In the San Francisco metropolitan area, 30% by car, 3.8% by transit. That's the best in the country. Look at New York, 14% by car, 2.5% by transit. The point is, if you are a single mother, let us say, or a single father who needs to drop the kid off at daycare and have a job, chances are you aren't even going to be able to work if you have to rely on transit. And you can see, for example, in LA, about 33 times, if you have a car, you can get to 33 times as many jobs as you can by transit. Similar numbers elsewhere. That's just a chart telling you how long it takes by transit. You can see that the bulk of over 60-minute trips around the country are on transit. Now, here's a real important thing. A lot of people think that everybody who is on poverty, who works, goes to work by transit. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nationally, 60% of people in poverty who work get to work by car, and another 12.5% get there by carpooling. Transit's only 12%. I won't waste the time on the individual numbers here, but this is real important. And there was a marvelous op-ed, I don't know the lady, a lady by the name of Tracy Jean Rosenthal, did an op-ed for the Times, the LA Times, about 2 years ago, in which she basically said transit is causing gentrification. And I'll tell you what gentrification is doing. It's driving market share down, because not all the new people that move in to places like Koreatown and East LA and Boyle Heights and Echo Park are using transit every day to commute. They're probably commuting all over the place like everyone else is. And so you can see there's a census definition called the PUMA, which is a public use microdata area, about 200,000 people per area. You can see in the Koreatown area, the large loss in transit, in commuting in just 5 years. You can see along the others, the major areas of good transit use. And by the way, East LA, and it doesn't get any better for transit than East LA, well connected to downtown, which is the only place you can get on transit, okay? East LA is down 35% in transit ridership for commuting in the last 5 years. Now, let's go to talk a little bit about demographics. I do a report, just put out our 16th edition a couple of days ago, called Demographia World Urban Areas. We list all urban areas, more than 1,000, of more than 500,000 we can find, showing the urban population, urban land area, and urban density. Just to make sure you understand, if you read the paper, you get the impression that as cities grow, they become more dense. Nothing could be further from the truth. Virtually all cities get less dense as they grow larger. You can see what's happened in terms of employment growth in the United States, a continuing trend of decentralization. Since 2010, and this is small area analysis, which I'll describe to you, 9% of the job growth has been in central business districts, 91% out one. That's in the outside. That's in the 53 metropolitan areas of more than a million. Now, this is a strange chart. It's about Paris, but I'll tell you how it relates to here. What I deal with is urban areas. Now, an urban area is where the development stops. So, for example, it's not a metropolitan area. It doesn't mean you have to take Contra Costa County. It would stop. Actually, the Census Bureau breaks the urban area, breaks Concord off the San Francisco urban area, which I disagree with. But still, the point is, an urban area is developed, cannot be defined by counties, etc. So we have urban areas, then we have metropolitan, and so right here, for example, we have the city of San Francisco. Here we have the rest of the urban area, which is unfortunately split between San Jose and San Francisco, which is madness, but that's another issue. And then you have exurban areas. So this gets you to places like Brentwood and Santa Rosa and those kinds of places. But anyway, we're dealing with urban areas. This is our delineation, and you'll find similar delineations by others of the LA urban area. Just as an example, you can see it actually combines a few census urban areas, but that is the LA urban area. Now, I've developed what I call a city sector model that divides the country by zip code into functional forms based upon what kind of community they are. And there are basically 5 categories. One is pre-World War II urban cores, and that's split into central business districts and inner rings. Then we have the earlier suburbs, which have a median house construction date of after 1945. Then we have the later suburbs, which have a median house construction date of after 1980, and the exurbs, which are outside the urban area. This gives an idea how we do that.
Wendell, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you slow down? You're going so fast that my brain isn't working.
Okay, okay. Sorry about that. I'll try. Okay, here we see, for example, the red, and this is before we split the urban core into two categories. The red is essentially the pre-war city of Los Angeles. Now, it's not all that. There's plenty of pre-war in the rest of it. I mean, urban area. However, a lot of the development is later, but that's just for information. Now, what we have in the 53 metropolitan areas of the United States with more than 1 million, about 14 to 15% of the population lives in the old urban core, essentially the pre-war urban core, where we have high population densities, older housing, better transit, etc. You can see that the earlier suburbs have the most, the later suburbs next, and the exurbs. Growth is a little bit greater in the suburbs and exurbs. The cores are continuing to lose, and that's even before COVID.
Wait a minute. Hold on, Wendell. Could you say that one more time?
The cores are continuing to lose in terms of their share of population. So, for example, and by the way, the city of San Francisco has been doing very well, though its population growth has actually stopped last year. The city of San Francisco is doing uncharacteristically well, but essentially the urban core areas, and this is based on zip codes, are declining as a share of the overall population of metropolitan areas. So I'll skip over that. Now, here's something you need to know, and I hope that Senator Wiener knows. You want to know what state has the highest urban population density in the country? It's called California, okay? In fact, if you look at the data, and I don't have a chart on this now, the new development that occurred in California between 2000 and 2010 was at more than 10,000 per square mile. Now, to give you an idea what that means, the average urban density, not a rural square meter in it, the average urban density in this country is 2,500. Yet the average new density in California cities was 10,000 or more in the last 10 years. We don't have data after 2010. This may shock you even more. Thinking about urban areas, continuous urbanization, the most densely populated urban area is by far called Los Angeles. San Francisco is second. San Jose is third. San Jose didn't even hardly exist at the time of World War II. And guess who's fourth? New York. Why is that? Well, I hope I've got, here's why. You see this picture on the left, that is basically just south of Upland in the Ontario area, just before the Ontario airport. Look at that density. There we are 25, 30 miles, well, I think more like 25, I got kilometers there, from downtown LA. Now, let's look at the New York suburbs in Jersey that are the same distance away. If you were to go out to Nassau County, in the other direction, or even up to Westchester County, you would find similar, though maybe a little bit higher densities. The point is that we have in Los Angeles very high densities by US urban standards, and even New York's incredibly dense, the city of New York, Manhattan, doesn't make up for it.
Hey, Wendell, somebody
Yes.
is asking on the Zoom discussion, Tony Wilkinson. Hi, Tony. He says the slide didn't match the description. Post-World War I suburbs have construction dates of 1947 to 1960.
That was for the early post-World War is my point.
So just, could you
Let me take a look here.
clear that up? You whipped through this slide, so thank you, Tony.
Right. Let's see here. Now, what's your point?
That on the post-World War II suburban, earlier, it says median year house built before 1980, but it's not clear because later says after 1979. I suppose.
Oh, I see. So we're just.
And actually, that's a pretty late cutoff. I was using 47 to 60. So you're going all the way up to 1980, which is fairly modern.
Well, yeah, and the reason I do that is if you look at house sizes as late as 1970, we were still looking at median house size of around 1,500 square feet, and that's gone much up. But anyway, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think that's a good thing. We'll in the next iteration, I will get that clear. I mean, our line was between 1979 and 1980.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. Go
No
ahead,
problem.
back to where you were, Wendell.
No problem. Let me see where I was. Okay, so LA is very dense. And that's real important to understand. And where are you going to put Wiener's houses in that picture? I don't understand. But anyway, that's another issue. I guess we're going to have skyscrapers. Now, here is something that's real interesting. Look at what's happened to the population of California. And this is particularly interesting with respect to SB 50. I don't know where you're going to get these people to fill all these all this great new density. The state of California was gaining at about 300,000 a year in the beginning of the decade. And by the way, at that point, had population growth that was probably as slow as it's ever had in the history, in the lives of any of us on this Zoom program. Look at what happened by 2019. Last year, you gained 51,000 residents. That's incredible. Let's look, though, at what's going on with domestic migration, net domestic migration. That's people who move from one place to another. So this is people moving, residents of California. They could have migrated from Japan last year, but they're residents of California last year. They moved in the current year. You can see that we were at about 50,000 negative in 2011. We were at 200,000 negative in 2019. And by the way, the number since 2000 is 2.5 million.
So wait a minute, Wendell, does this mean the net number of people who moved out while others were moving in? Is that what it's showing? Okay.
Yes. And by the way, the reason that we look so good in the early years is because the Bay Area really was doing well. If you go back to 2000, even the Bay Area did poorly, and the number since 2000 is close to 2.5 million. That's incredible. I mean, there were years where we were in California gaining millions of net domestic migrants. I mean, nobody ever grew like California grew. A lot of people are not aware that, for example, that the Census Bureau has now expanded the Bay Area combined statistical area. That's a larger metropolitan definition based on slightly weaker commuting data. Used to be that it essentially was the San Jose and San Francisco metropolitan areas, which in my mind should be one. But in any event, they have in this decade added, and by the way, that also included places like Sonoma County, Solano County, Santa Cruz County, etc. However, since that time in the 2000s, they've added a number of three metropolitan areas in the Central Valley: Stockton with the ACE commuter service, and now in the last iteration, Stanislaus County and Merced County. In other words, you drive 30 miles north of downtown Fresno, and you're in the most liberal definition of the San Francisco metropolitan area. Here's what's going on in that area in terms of domestic migration. Sorry, I didn't have a chance to update the numbers to 2009, but they're even worse. You can see that San Francisco County was actually doing pretty well in domestic migration until 2015. The Bay Area excerpts, again, that's Napa, Sonoma, etc. They were doing a little better. San Jose has been losing for ages. And the Central Valley suburbs, exurbs are now beginning to gain. But the Central Valley during the 2000s gained very well, but hasn't done very well since that time. But again, you can see a big drop off here. Now we look at the LA CSA. Now that includes obviously LA Orange plus San Bernardino, Riverside, and Ventura. You can see that Los Angeles County population trend was actually gaining, but not very much. And look at how it has fallen now. Actually lost the last 2 years. I think that's the first time anybody's actually been able to identify a loss in Los Angeles County. The other counties aren't doing bad, but they're all doing, except for Ventura, which never did much in the last 20 years. The other counties are doing worse than they did in the 2000s, but they're fairly steady. But you can see Orange declining. Now, when we looked, oh my goodness, what happened here? Oh, I must have killed the domestic migration trend sign. I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's talk now then. We'll finish up with a discussion of our International Housing Affordability Survey and the situation that you have in California. We rate 92 major markets in 9 countries, 309 total markets. We use something called the median multiple, which is the median house price divided by the median household income. We consider based upon a historical analysis, we consider any metropolitan area that has a median multiple of 3 or under. That means the house price is only 3 times your total household income. 3 and under is affordable, 4, and the next you see is moderately unaffordable up to 4, seriously unaffordable is up to 5, and 5.1 and over is severely unaffordable, and you win the prize. Every metropolitan area in the state is a major metropolitan area in the state is in that severely unaffordable classification. You can see here what's happened to the median multiple, that price to income ratio, since 2000. In LA, it's gone from 4.7 to 9. That's just in 19 years. In San Francisco, from 7.1 to 8.4. Though San Francisco's increases really occurred mainly in the 80s and the 70s, and they stayed fairly constant and then grew a little, increased a little after that. San Diego up, San Jose up, Riverside, San Bernardino. That used to be a place where you could go to get an inexpensive house. Not anymore. Riverside, San Bernardino is now as expensive as Portland, which is an abomination.
Wendell, could you please explain the green and the red better, a little bit more?
Oh, sure. The green is 2000.
No, but what does it mean? What does the green mean?
In 2000, the median house price in Los Angeles metropolitan area was 4.7 times the median household income. By the way, in 1969, it was in the mid-2s, okay? And you see Sacramento, where you would also think things are pretty good. Well, people are moving to Sacramento. Sacramento has hugely restrictive land use policies. They're now over 5. Even Fresno. I mean, that's amazing. So anyway, I just want to make sure you're aware of this trend. Let me show you what the trend looks like more from a longer perspective. Oh, yeah. We were featured in last month's International Monetary Fund Global Housing Market Watch newsletter with an interview with me on our most recent survey, and it was a very nice thing. Anyway, here's what's happened to housing and affordability since the war, since World War II anyway. In the 5 metropolitan areas that are severely unaffordable or 6, I should say, in California, you can see that they went up very high during the bust, up to almost 9. I can't, unfortunately, the screen's in my way. It's up about 7 to 8 now. There are other severely unaffordable markets in other parts of the country, but they aren't as bad as California. And then the rest of the country is up a little bit, but not much. So housing affordability hasn't worsened much at all. And by the way, there's a huge body of research on this that we do not have time to go into today, and et cetera. The economic research is very clear that this is very much associated with very strict land use regulations. And my own thought is that the passage and implementation of SB 375 really is what made things much worse in Southern California, because it pretty much implemented policies that were similar to what was already going on in the Bay Area.
Hey, Wendell, can you go back to that slide just briefly?
Yeah.
What does that black peak mean there at 2005? And what did the...
Yeah, and again, this is the median multiple. Around, I think it was 2007 or maybe even 2006, house prices hit their peak in the build-up to the bust. And so the median multiple, the average median multiple for the 6 metropolitan areas was almost 9. San Jose and LA were over 11. And then it drops, you see, drops down to 5. And by the way, as my theory is, this drops very significantly. And believe me, a whole lot more people, even though having a median multiple in my mind of 5 is outrageous, a lot more people can buy when the median multiple is 5 than when it's 9. And so you see in the early 2010s, California isn't doing nearly as bad as it did before, and it's been doing since. And I think that's an important part of the story, which I will conclude with. Let me also, this is perhaps a shocking thing. This is out of our report based upon National Association of Realtor data. If you look at the minimum qualifying income based upon normal underwriting formulas that National Association of Realtors uses for comparison, you can see that the minimum qualifying income for a median priced house in the San Jose metropolitan area is more than the top quintile floor. In other words, you think about there are 5 categories of income, let's say, bottom 20% to top 20%. A lot of people, a lot of organizations, say Brookings Institution, pretty much define the middle class as the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quintile. The fifth quintile is upper income. Look at that. You've got to be upper income to qualify for a house in San Jose. In Honolulu, I apologize for that. That's the only other place in the country that's nearly so bad. San Francisco is almost the same. San Diego and LA, these being metropolitan areas as well. In other words, the middle class cannot afford middle class housing in California anymore. Now, by the way, these numbers look very bad. I should say to you, and this is not in any way to undermine the YIMBY arguments, but the data shows that the rent increases have been far less than this, still more than they should have been. But if you look just back to the bust, of course, it doesn't look that way because we still aren't completely at the peak in the bust. Okay, so two more.
Wendell, one question from the crowd.
Yeah.
What is it? What is a quintile again? Can you explain that?
A quintile is, sorry, I've got to figure out how to. Okay, a quintile is 20%. So if you have every household, the bottom quintile in terms of how much they have in income is normally referred to as low income. The middle three from 20 to 80 are considered the middle class, and the top quintile are the upper class, or the
top 20% then?
Yeah, top 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, the reason this is all so important, and this is, a lot of people don't realize this, but if you look, and this is out of work we're doing now that's soon to be published, 87, if you look at the standard, at the cost of living around the country by metropolitan area, and you say, okay, let's look at the ones that have costs of living that are 10% above the normal, okay? How much of that is the response, is the result of the difference in the cost of housing? 87%. In other words, as Richard Florida put into an article recently for City Lab, if you know the difference in the housing costs, you know the difference in the cost of living. And so for any that wonders, what this means, here is migration, net domestic migration in the 53 largest metropolitan areas by housing affordability category. You can see the severely unaffordable, and that includes all 6 California major metropolitan areas, has huge outmigration. Everywhere else doing reasonably well. The most affordable have some pretty depressed in them. They're not doing as well, but they're doing much better than the severely unaffordable. All of that brings you to essentially my view that really California will never recover economically. Now, by the way, California is not in a basket case by any means, but California, there aren't going to be any big companies moving to California. It's going to be unusual for many companies to expand. We will see more McKesson's and Jacobs Engineerings and Toyotas leave the state because people can't afford to work there, et cetera, et cetera. It is a big problem. I don't have an answer that's politically acceptable, but I can tell you what's not the answer, and that's SB 50. Anyway, I'm sorry for going a little over and happy to have any discussion here.
Wendell, I'd like to start it off by, some people said you went through it so fast that they'd like to get those slides so they can review them for themselves, and sure, that would be great. And
yeah, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, and secondly, the big war now that we've killed SB 50, the big wars are against the lookalike bills. There's Scott Wiener SB 902, which wipes out single family housing statewide. And the LA Times has misreported it. They're saying that it will go to fourplexes. That's not true. With the granny flat law, which is, they're called ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, it's actually going to be 8 units per lot in single family areas. It's going to be apartment buildings. The LA Times will probably never report this fact because of Liam Dillon. But can you reflect a little bit? There are about 4 or 5 bills. There's Buffy Wick's horrific AB 725, which I think you're familiar, Wendell, with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, also called RHNA.
Right.
So Buffy takes RHNA and she weaponizes it into a disastrous way to force the new density into single family and duplex and smaller apartment areas. and wipe out those areas and make them into giant. It's all luxury, by the way. There's no affordable required by Buffy Wicks. And then we've got Richard Bloom stepping in from Santa Monica with a bill for micro units of only 80 square feet, luxury micro units that we're calling luxury walk-in closets that can be, they have a broad ability to build them almost anywhere, almost no rules. It's really completely out of control, and he's got a couple of really bad ones. So we're seeing about 6 or 7 consistent Wiener and Wiener followers with ultra density plans this year. And we understand now from very good sources that they're only going to have one hearing. They're not going to have the usual 3 policy hearings. Like it might go to transportation, it might go to housing, and it might go to government. It's not going to happen this time. They're going to rush it through one committee only, and there's going to be a lot less time to fight them. Just a general reaction to what I've just told you?
Well, one thing that I forgot to mention, I hope you're all aware of this, that California has the highest housing cost adjusted poverty rate in the country. That should be of great concern. And you're right in terms of luxury units. The fact is that, I mean, you know, you can't build multifamily in California affordably. You just can't. And I don't know where this demand is going to come from. I mean, my sense is, one, even if it all passes, it's going to be a big bust. But that's fine. That doesn't help you at all. What concerns me, first of all, this is a heavy hand that is liable to wipe out all sorts of good things about California. We've had this kind of thing before. In the late 40s, we had urban renewal and wiped out wonderful black neighborhoods. We might not have liked them, you and I, today in our affluence, but they were wonderful neighborhoods that people liked at that point. They were wiped out by urban renewal, and there were millions of houses and buildings wiped out by urban renewal and by freeway construction in the United States. Strikes me that the same kind of thing, similar, that Wiener is behind the wheel of a similar bulldozer at this point. And I think what that does, I mean, I think, first of all, anything you can do to fight to stop it, fine. And I'm real pleased. I know Joel Kotkin, my associate, continually talks about repurposing retail. And I think after COVID, there are going to be even more opportunities to do this. And I think it's terribly irresponsible, and forgive me, I may be violating California state law at this point, but I think it's terribly irresponsible of the state to proceed with any sort of planning at this point. We don't even know what the world's going to, this is like in 1929. We're now November 15th of 1929, and we are proceeding with all sorts of plans for 1939. We don't know what's going to happen. It's time to sit back and figure out what's going on. But in any event, yeah, the fact is, and Jill, as you know, we've talked from time to time, I've for a long time been saying we need to look at what the zoning capacity is of these cities, because I'm confident that there's plenty of room to build all of the high rise and ADUs and you name it that Senator Wiener would like, and he doesn't have to mess up your neighborhood. The other problem, though, that I didn't get into, but I'll just mention it, recognize that what is it that drives housing costs? It is the cost of building houses on the periphery. You don't allow that. That means the costs are higher. Okay,
now if you could change the view so that we don't see the giant slide, and so that we can.
Sure, yeah, let's see here.
Thank you.
If I can figure out how to do. Oh, wait a minute.
I'm gonna hog the mic for one more second while you're doing this, Wendell.
Yeah, okay.
To say, yeah, we think that we think that the bills that should be coming out should be about how to reward telecommuting and how to repurpose empty storefronts. There are some wonderful bills. There's a Senate Bill 1299 by the very smart, very unimpressed by Scott Wiener, Anthony Portantino, who is the chair of appropriations in the Senate. He's one of the real independent thinkers, and he's got Senate Bill 1299. And there are 2 or 3 more that directly try to reward the reuse of commercial buildings without attacking existing housing. And about a month ago, we had the incredible Peter Calthorpe on this very call. And Peter Calthorpe, who for years has been all about, not all about, but heavily into major density and transit-oriented growth, has changed his mind on a number of issues. And he spoke to Scott Wiener and said, Scott, you should not pursue SB 50. You're creating a massive war, and the good things that people are trying to do are going to get caught up in your war. And he told us publicly on this call that Scott Wiener ignored him. And Peter Calthorpe's new idea, he's abandoned the old approach, transit-oriented. He said transit is way too expensive, and that's one of the reasons it's failing. They didn't see that when they came up with transit-oriented. They didn't realize that the old cities are the only ones that are ever going to have really extensive transit. And he's going toward very flexible small vans to move people around. And he's got a fantastic plan for using storefronts throughout the Bay Area on the major boulevards and not touching a single residential area, not one. And he's found room for, I think he said 1.2 million housing units in low buildings, 4-unit to 5-unit buildings in the old, Toys R Us buildings and so on, these areas. Okay, so he's already done an incredible GIS look at the Bay Area. Now he's seeking funding to do the same GIS look at Los Angeles. He said there's going to be millions of places to put the housing and not disrupt healthy, existing, nice places to live. But good luck getting the legislature to wake up to this, everybody. That's our goal. That's our battle this year. Okay, sorry for the lecture. Thank you very much for the great presentation. We're going to keep you on for the Q&As, and Rick is going to control the microphone